I think it paints masculinity as a bad thing in terms of we should avoid it at all costs.
I wouldn't say all masculinity is bad at all. I think actually we lack mature masculinity. The conversation of toxic masculinity is a very important conversation, but we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Everyone wants to demonize one thing. Everyone wants to find the culprit that is apparently the problem in every relationship. Happy wife, happy life.
Actually putting any energy into the relationship to make it beautiful, to make it grand. Everybody thinks they're more self-aware than they actually are. The living in a relationship which isn't actually the relationship you desire, it's a relationship you think your partner desires. Be like, oh, I'm feeling uncomfortable. It's because I feel attacked. I feel attacked because I have an underlying belief that I'm not good enough. Oh, feeling a bit defensive there. I just felt like you were telling me I was a little child and I'm not allowed to open the fridge when I want to open the fridge, and now I feel sad. I'm going to run off to my bedroom. Do this, don't say this, never do that, wear this thing, treat her badly, be really avoidant, don't show your emotions, and all these things which miss the nuances of relating and connecting. That doesn't turn you on. I was like, what? He's like, that doesn't turn you on. I actually think people should schedule sex.
Oh, that's controversial. Welcome back to the Not Quite Pod. Today we've got David with us. David, do you just quickly want to introduce yourself and let everyone know a bit about yourself?
Yeah. I'm a men's dating, relationship and intimacy coach. I focus really on helping men create the sort of relationships that are deeply connected and are fulfilling to them across the board. And also I do a lot of work with men around, masculinity, because that intersects with relationships quite heavily, as well as intimacy work, sex and intimacy work with men, helping them really kind of come into their really sexually confident selves.
I'm really excited for this conversation, particularly like you've already touched on one topic I wanted to bring into this conversation, which is your experience and your opinions with the whole discussion surrounding toxic masculinity and what you've seen in the space that you're working on. Because I think it's a really tricky one, because I think it paints masculinity as a bad thing in terms of we should avoid it at all costs, when actually my opinion is, no, it's all about what everything is about. It is, if you take it to the extremes, it can get utterly ridiculous. But as long as you use it in the right context and you understand it, then it's absolutely fine.
A lot of things are really contextual. Like, I was having a conversation with someone around aggression, for instance, and they were saying aggression's always bad. And I said, I don't actually agree that aggression's always bad. And they gave me a load of examples where aggression is bad. And I said, and I gave them an example, and I'll probably share the example, is a lot of my clients, a number of them I work with, they're nice guys. They're nice, gentle, kind. They've grown up in households where everyone wants to be kind and nice. And the thing that they have pushed into the shadow part of themselves, the things they reject about themselves, anything aggressive. So for them, aggression, what I would call aggression, what they call aggression, two very different things. So sometimes for them, some of the practice that I'll have them do is actually act out aggression, embody aggression in their own homes, in their own bedrooms, in a safe space where no one's going to be harmed or hurt by what they're doing. And that might just be making sound and moving in a way that feels aggressive. And actually what that is for is to help them, say, expand beyond their meekness, right, into something that's more assertive, right? Because a lot of people conflate assertiveness and aggression, especially when you're used to being, kind and gentle and meek. So, as I said, there's always a context for things, but it's very easy for us to kind of look at masculinity and say masculinity is bad, masculinity is wrong, all of it is bad and wrong. I know there's some sections of kind of radical feminism that say all masculinity is wrong, but then they class masculinity as kind of competition, and a very particular type of competition. I wouldn't say all masculinity is bad at all. I think actually we lack mature masculinity. What we experience with kind of toxic masculinity, in my opinion, and with my experience and what I see, is this kind of immature masculinity, which is like dominance, which is selfishness, which is power over. Those are all things that you see as kind of immature traits. And when I say immature masculinity, is to say that there's another level we can move in maturity. If I say that I actually see independence as an immature trait of masculinity, right? Because the more mature trait of mature masculinity in comparison to that is interdependence, which is connecting with others to create something bigger and greater than ourselves. And, you know, for instance, example, the independence is something we do as adolescents. We get stuck in independence. We want to do our own thing and not be beholden to our parents. But if we don't mature out of that, we live out a life that is immature and is hurtful and lacks empathy and so forth to other people quite often. So the conversation of toxic masculinity is a very important conversation. It's, you know, it's much needed through, you know, due to history. But we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as much as it can be tempting because of the pain that the brand of masculinity, the man box rules that we have experienced has caused to the whole world. But doing so throws out things that are actually incredibly useful and loving and growth orientated within men and outside of men and in society as a whole.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that it's that whole thing of, I think, as I said previously, we always go to the extremes and we always want to say it's one thing or the other. We see the same thing when it comes to health and nutrition. Everyone wants to demonize one thing, whether that be fats, whether that be sugar. It's the same thing. Everyone wants to demonize. Everyone wants to find the culprit that is apparently the problem in every relationship. And as you say, it's very contextual, depends on the situation, what each person's like, how each person communicates, love languages, and so much more. How would you say men should improve their communication when it comes to romantic partnerships?
Yeah, this is something that's kind of chronic for men. You know, I had a conversation with a man today, and his communication problem is really sad, actually. It's caused a breakup of his relationship, his defensiveness. You know, and I just give you a quick example because I've been talking to men about defensiveness a lot this last few weeks. Is, you know, say our partners, if we got female partners, she brings up an issue, a problem, or something she wants to improve in the relationship. Man hears that and gets defensive, hears it as an attack or a criticism about him and his performance and how well he's been doing in the relationship. So he either stays in defensiveness and shuts down, or he goes on the counter-attack, usually fueled by a little bit of anger or shame. Usually underneath the anger is shame and guilt, or a feeling of not being good enough, which is usually at the root of our feelings of shame and guilt often. So the key here is presence. It sounds so simple. I was reading a testimonial for one of the men that was on my program, and he said in the first couple of weeks of the program, he realized that presence was everything. And why I was talking about presence often is because in those moments when we're communicating with somebody, we have to be present to what it is we're hearing, like really present to what we're hearing, not the story about what we're hearing. So often as people, what we do is we listen through the lens of what is this person trying to say, as if we're trying to decipher what they're saying. So we don't really listen to people very well. We listen to the story we have about them or the story we have about ourselves. Like, what is this person saying to me? What does it mean about who I am? And then we reply to that thinking we have, which causes all manner of conflicts and problems. So that's one of the big points, is like listening is the most important part of communication. As simple as that, really listening. Another part is feeling, you know, this ability to know what one is feeling, to pause, be able to pause, presence again, pause and notice the sensations and feelings, because that's often where feelings arise, is in the sensation in the body, and then speak from that place. So as I sit here now, I'm like, yeah, I'm feeling slightly nervous. And then I can communicate from this place of like, that's what I'm feeling, that's what's there for me right now. So that's the kind of communicating part, is actually being present to what's true for you if we're talking about feelings. But I guess for men, a lot of it is actually expanding one's ability to communicate, like not listening to the story of like, no one wants to listen to me, what I have to say is not important, or I shouldn't speak, or I shouldn't talk about certain topics. That's a really common one I see with men. And also this idea that the fear of making a mistake or saying the wrong thing. So like when we kind of bunch all those things in, is I see men in relationships with a lot, is that they're not really expressing themselves. They're not really communicating to their partners. They're not really saying what's going on for them, but they're also not really listening to their partners very much either, or they're ignoring certain things, or they're shutting down conversations because of their own fears and uncomfortabilities. And this creates a dynamic in relationships of, you know, a lack of closeness and intimacy, a feeling of distance from one another. So there's so many different areas when it comes to communication, because and I say this all the time, and it sounds quite boring and cliche, but communication is the lifeblood of a relationship. If we neglect our communication of a relationship, we will experience pain, and we will experience a lot of pain, and we will blame it on our partners, or we blame it on somebody else, or we blame it on society, or we blame it on women, when in fact the responsibility lies with us and how we are showing up and how we are being in our relationship, and especially from a capacity of communication.
I think it's really interesting because one thing, and it's a recent realization and a recent suspicion I have, which is that every problem, no matter what situation it is in life, whether it's work, whether it's relationships, or whether it's this, that, the other, everything comes from pure communication. So if you look at it from a business context, if a business isn't functioning properly, likelihood is something's not being passed up the tree properly, and that means a business isn't functioning properly. It works the same as a relationship. If there's a problem, likelihood is that's come from a communication problem. But then on that note, I want to ask you your opinion on the old cliche saying, which is happy wife, happy life, or happy girlfriend, happy life, however you want to take it. What is your opinion on that? I know it's it's just a kind of thing that we just say, but do you think that has had any impact? Have you had any clients and say, oh, but like happy wife, happy life, or this, don't say anything, stay quiet? What's your experience of that been?
Yeah, a happy life, happy wife is the kind of age-old saying, and I've worked with men who have lived by that in their relationships, and I've been speaking to them because their relationship is breaking down, either a divorce or breakup. And what it manifests is that you are always doing actions. The focus is always how can I make this person happy? What can I do to make them happy? Instead of what am I doing to make us happy? What am I doing to create more connection between us? What am I doing to create more fun and joy and play between us? You're thinking about happiness as this very simple one-dimensional thing, and really, are you thinking about happiness, or you think about comfort? How can I make this comfortable? And the guise of making a partner happy is actually the guise of I just want the least amount of grief and stress. So are you just doing things to kind of appease? So it's not even really about their happiness, it's about their appeasement. So it's about just kind of keeping them like, almost like you do with a small dog, you just pat them to keep them happy and, keep them there. But you're actually putting any energy into the relationship to make it beautiful, to make it grand, to make it, the legendary relationships that we all want to exist in. So when I see this of men, is what they've done is they've been showing up in a really mediocre way. Everything just been mediocre because they're just like, oh, I'm doing the bare minimum to keep them happy. And actually, there's been kind of an underlying resentment often from their partners, usually women, where they're like, actually, I haven't really been happy, and you haven't really been listening to what's making me happy. You've been doing what you think is going to make me happy instead of actually listening to me and what I really want. And there's also the factor of the lack of authenticity in it. The living in a relationship which isn't actually the relationship you desire. It's a relationship you think your partner desires. And I always add that word in think, because I don't know what my partner desires unless I really ask them, and I really pay attention to them as well, because I can ask them, what do you want? And I can get one level of depth, and I pay attention to how they respond to the things I do, the things I say, how I smile at them, how I make love to them, and I get another level of information from that as well, which they may not be conscious of, and I can reflect back to them. But if we are living happy wife, happy life, we're not really conscious, we're not really aware, we're just living on this kind of surface level in the relationship. So we're just kind of appeasing, and it doesn't take long for our partners to lose that interest, lose the spark of the relationship, and just feel like, oh, I'm in this relationship and this is I'm just with someone who's keeping me at a distance. So, but I'll just add in also, is like with the communication, and in this, even with happy wife, happy life, is we need to be aware of the internal communication that's happening within us. Like the little reactions and responses and why they're happening, those deeper bits of communication that happens internally. Because I can, just like I said there with the partner, the way you make love to her, how she responds to the things you do, how she responds to you doing housework, whatever, she may not know that there is a communication happening inside of her that you can notice in you that she may not be consciously aware of it, right? Because we're not always consciously aware of everything, you know? So it's like and the same is happening within ourselves as well. So it's like being able to feel deeper, notice deeper, be more aware, so that we can understand ourselves better and we can understand our needs and the desires and how we can be happy as well.
I think what you've just sort of reiterated there is the other thing is that comes into it is emotional intelligence, because you're naturally picking up on the body language of others, and it's a skill that not only impacts our romantic relationship, it impacts our friendships, our professional relationships. If you can get good with your emotional intelligence, you can pick up on things that others don't see. I mean, I think bringing in the disability context that I have, I've always said that I've got a good level of emotional intelligence because of having to rely on people to support me, help me. So I have to understand how others are feeling to then understand how to approach those conversations, particularly to give you a real world example. Like if someone's very wary of a disability because they don't understand it, I have to approach the conversation very differently to someone who's very confident with disability, knows exactly what they're doing. They run away with it. So what role when it comes to relationships does emotional intelligence and knowing how your partner's feeling, what their body language is telling you, and everything else that goes with it?
You've hit the nail on the head there, Charlie. The thing is that and I like to always use an example for my clients. And I spoke to the phrase emotional intelligence came up in a coaching session I was in, just over an hour ago. And the guy said to me, we've been working together for about 3 or 4 months now, post a breakup he was in. And we were talking about the sort of relationship that he would want. And he said, I want someone who's emotionally intelligent. And then went on to say, I'm quite surprised I'm saying that because I'd never really thought of it in that way. I've always thought of it as like, I want someone who understands me and appreciates me and notices the things that I do. And he was like, but really, that is just a collection of things that go under the umbrella of emotional intelligence. I would say emotional intelligence is one of the most important things that make relationships thrive. I've got a book behind me here. It's a book by a guy called Daniel Goldman. Yeah, Daniel Goldman. The book's called Emotional Intelligence. And I read it many years ago. And I always remember what it said in there. And he says that emotional intelligence is a better predictor of career success than IQ, right? It's a better indicator of career success than IQ. We spend a lot of time thinking about IQ and how clever someone is, right? But we do not spend as much time nurturing our emotional intelligence, even though the studies and research show from a business point of view, from a career point of view, our emotional intelligence is far more important than our IQ. And I see this in relationships all the time. I used the example before of defensiveness, right? With the guy I was working with. And that's simply this. Does he have the emotional intelligence in the moment that when his partner says something to him that he finds uncomfortable, to notice that he feels uncomfortable, to be like, oh, I'm feeling uncomfortable. Yep. It's because I feel attacked. I feel attacked because I have an underlying belief that I'm not good enough. That's just a reaction based on a story that I have, based on maybe some imprint I got from childhood. That isn't actually what this person's saying to me. They're just saying that there's something they want to change and fix. Let me respond to that. Let me respond from the higher part of who I am. And we're doing that kind of cognitive, emotional work. We're having to do constantly. Even me sitting here in this moment, I'm doing certain bits of emotional work within me, noticing any sort of like looks and uncomfortabilities or tightness in my chest as I'm speaking. And I'm like, oh, what is that? And being curious. So the emotional intelligence piece, it doesn't sound sexy. It really doesn't. But like, it is I'd go as far as to say it's like, it can be some of the most important personal work to do. And I think my experience is a bit like with self-awareness. Everybody thinks they're more self-aware than they actually are. There's some studies about this actually, that if you ask people to grade out of 10 how self-aware they are, most people say 7 or 8. And I see the same thing with emotional intelligence. Most people think they're way more emotionally intelligent than they actually are. And I think sometimes we have to kind of come back and with a bit of humbleness. Like I've still got a long way to go. I really do. It's still something I work on. I still work on the tiny moments where my reactivity comes through instead of my conscious choice of how I want to respond. You know, my partner, also, we had a baby about a month ago. She might say something to me and I say something back, and, you know, she's a great mirror for me because we can be very honest, and she'd be like, oh, feeling a bit defensive there. And I'll go, wow, you know what? You're right. I didn't notice that. And then we kind of like to dramatize it for the fun of it. I'd be like, I just felt like you were telling me I was a little child and I'm not allowed to open the fridge when I want to open the fridge. And now I feel sad. I'm going to run off to my bedroom, you know? And we do that because it's fun. Yeah. There's a funness to it. There's an embodied enjoyment. Yeah. And also knowing that at some deep level, it's almost like that. You know, there's a little child, David, me, that was being told what to do at home all the time. So when my partner does it, I feel like a small child and I react like a small child, you know? And that might only come out in a very tiny way that's not particularly offensive or passive aggressive, but it's just a hint there. And, you know, every time I acknowledge that, I bring more acceptance to that part of me, right? Whenever when I become defensive or I counterattack or I go, that's not what I'm doing, I'm pushing that bit away from me and I'm giving it more power.
I hear that. And I think as well, one suspicion, and I'd be interested to get your opinion on this, the other side of emotional intelligence is I always wonder, is there an element, when I say this out loud, it sounds really horrible, but I don't mean it in that context of like, you can almost, I'm going to say it, you can manipulate things because you can understand how a situation's panning out. And by that, what I mean is, if you can notice that someone's getting agitated, defensive, and it's just from a miscommunication or misunderstanding, you can quickly understand that and almost diffuse it before it gets any bigger. Not in terms of not explaining it and articulating it, but just being able to go, whoa, before, because I know what you're going to say, because I realized how that sounded coming out. This is what I actually meant, and sort of explaining that concern that a person might have. Do you think that's true? It was a suspicion I had, and I was like, it sounds really bad because it sounds like I'm manipulating people when I speak to them. No, I just mean, I don't believe in confrontation has its place, but I don't believe in unnecessary confrontation just by miscommunicating or misunderstanding. So I often use it as a situation of just, if I can diffuse it and explain it and make everyone feel at ease, great. I'm going to go with that option. I think that does come from the disability context that I have of like, you often feel that people are very nervous around you because they don't want to ask you about your disability because they're going to get very nervous. Everyone's going to freak out. So you're automatically on the, look, I'll make a joke about my disability because then I can put it out there that you're right. It's okay. You can ask about it. It's not the elephant in the room, but maybe it's a skill that I use and I overuse. But I wondered what your thoughts are in terms of like, do you think there is an element of good manipulation, if that's even a word or a term? a term?
I sometimes call it positive manipulation, and I wouldn't say it's manipulation, Charlie. What I would say is, this is what, and I haven't finished reading this book. Daniel Goleman's got a second book after emotional intelligence. He wrote a book called Social Intelligence, right? And I would say that that's what you're doing there. You have the social intelligence to know that, oh, when I walk into a room, right, people start to get nervous. They start to get uncomfortable, right? And I can't fully resonate with your personal lived experience, but I'm a black man, right? So sometimes I walk into rooms and everybody's white. And then I'm standing there and, you know, everyone wants to be good and politically correct. And I'll make a joke about the fact that I'm the only black man in the room and I'm a black man. And that's, you know, I might say, it's okay. I might say to a woman, it's okay. You can put your bag there and there. I'm not going to steal it. It's cool. Yeah. And because we know that by doing that, you remove a tension that's in the air that we don't want. And they don't want, and you're kind of liberating something in people. You're liberating like their expression. You're liberating their ease. And actually, people really love people who make them feel at ease, right? We love people that make us feel at ease. So it's a social intelligence as a way to move through a room, to connect with people, and to also express our personality of like, I'm someone who's full of ease, and I can feel a room. You know, you're saying there is that you can feel a room. You walk into a room and you're like, oh, this person over here, he's a very nice guy, But because I've got a disability, he's thinking, oh, I can't look at him. I can't stare at him. I stare at him, I'm going to make him uncomfortable and blah, blah, blah. And by just simply like looking at the elephant in the room and saying, look, here's an elephant in this room, you just instantly disarm everybody and everyone relaxes. It's a real social skill that. So a lot of people don't notice, they don't have what has often been called emotional attunement, like the ability to feel like being situations and be like, I'm feeling something. Other people are feeling something. Oh, I can feel what this is. What this is there's an uncomfortability around this, or there's something around that, and just naming it and like just bringing it down a few levels to make the social context and the social situation more fun and light, and also add more depth to it. Because, you know, if you know that you can you can tell a joke about disability, or I make a joke about being black, people know that they can ask a question, right? They might say to you, what is your disability? Like, were you born with a disability? Or is it something that happened to you in your life? Or they may say to me, like, what's it like being black? Or, you know, I did a talk not long ago and I made a joke about being black and going to church. And afterwards, a woman came up to me, was talking to me about this very thing. And we really got into, you know, the fetishization of black men and how that feels for me and blah, blah, blah. And she said to me, she was like, you know, I've never had this conversation with anybody. I've wondered about this my whole life, but I never felt comfortable to have this conversation. So I see, you know, Charlie, what you call there, the kind of good manipulation as actually like opening doors and opening minds.
I completely agree. And I think we're on the same page with this topic. I think the interesting thing for me is particularly in the disability space, and I'd be intrigued to see if it does happen in the people of color space, of there's a big discussion of like, oh, but we shouldn't have to do that. We shouldn't have to do. I'm like, yeah, but also it's for my opinion is in my context is like, if I diffuse that situation and make everyone feel a lot more comfortable, then the conversations held about that topic are going to hold more value, because we can go into a deeper level about teaching people about that topic rather than it being the elephant in the room and only asking the simple questions because we don't want to offend anyone. That's my opinion, but I don't know whether it's something you experience as well. It's that why should we have to explain? Why should we have to do this? Why should we have to simplify this? Why should we have to make jokes about this? And I think it's such a big discussion where it's like, but if we can communicate effectively with each other and everyone feels comfortable in the room, then as I say, the conversations hold more value.
I don't see it as a should, right? And I think this is just the way that I kind of view this topic. I don't see it as a should. I get to have really beautiful conversations about race with people. I get to have really incredible conversations about gender dynamics and dating and relationships, because I'm willing to put myself in the position to have those conversations. I'm willing to speak from personal experience. So I get to have those conversations, which are always really interesting to me, right? And we want to, you know, Gandhi said it, be the change you want to see in the world, right? Do I have to educate every white person about black people's lived experience? No, I don't. But if I'm standing in front of someone and I can be of service, not to them, right? This is where I think think it quite selfish. Like, I'm teaching the white man. I shouldn't have to teach the white man anything. We've been teaching the white man things a whole, 50 generations. It isn't that. I'm just helping this person in front of me. I'm helping them help the people that they speak to, that they then speak to, because it's not, I don't see it as a particular burden. I see it as, I think it's quite fun a lot of the time, to be honest, because I get to say things that a lot of people find really uncomfortable and can't say themselves, but I get to like explain my experience to people. And I like talking, so it's not a big problem to me. And it's like, who else is going to do that? So you want the person here in front of me to go and read 5 books, right, to understand what it's like to be a black man. That's a lot of cognitive load and a lot of effort, right? Whereas I could have a 15-minute conversation with them and they would glean so much more, and they're going to get more because I'm a real person that's standing in front of them. And I think that's, I don't see it as a burden. Maybe I see it as like an act of service, both to myself and the other person.
I completely resonate with it. I mean, it's something I bring up all the time. Of my concern's always been of, and this is my personal belief and why I do it, is in the disability context, if you're aggressive when someone asks you a question, then I always have the concern in my head of that's how they're going to view every disabled person they ever meet from then on out, which is a huge burden to carry. But then, as you say, there's a weird part of me that gets a kick out of it. So there's a weird part of me that actually enjoys the strange guy that comes up to me and goes, hey, we've never met before, but you've got a girlfriend. How does that work? What? That's literally what happens to me probably 60% of the time. The first question everyone goes with is, hold on, girlfriend, huh? Wait, bedroom, how does that work? It's always the first place it goes.
Yeah, and it's like, and then you get to have that conversation and you get to explain that to someone, and you get to express your part of who you are and part of your fun and lighthearted nature. And like, otherwise, if you, like you said, you get aggressive, then actually what you've also done, if someone's aggressive, is you've actually made that person feel like they can't ask questions. You've actually created a space that isn't safe. You know, we're always going, you know, people of color, people with disability, people of a spectrum of gender. We're always talking about safe spaces. It's like, but we're also part of it's also our job also to, you know, add to creating safe spaces for people to communicate and open up and ask questions. Because I think a big problem that we suffer from in the world is that we don't feel safe to ask questions, because we think if we get the answer wrong, we say the question the wrong way, we're going to get cancelled. So people don't ask questions, which stops conversations that really need to happen, right? Really need to happen, you know? Like I can think back to the times during, after George Floyd's death. I was working for a tech company at the time, and I held conversations, and I always started it and said, look, this is a place where you could say the wrong word, right? And I won't think any less of you. I won't accuse you of being racist. I just may correct you so that when you go forward, you feel more confident. Because if you don't feel like you can ask questions, you're not going to have conversations. You're not going to have conversations about Black Lives Matter, or you're not going to have conversations about race or gender if you can't ask a question about it so you can learn more, because you're just avoiding it. And then the problems get worse because there's more ignorance.
Me and you have the exact same belief. I've always said when it comes to talking about it, well, this is exactly why not quite politically correct exists, because I was concerned about the way that the disabled space was going in terms of how people were always meeting me and going, can I ask a question about your disability? And it's like, of course, like, the thing is, as I say, because of the active service and the kick I get out of it, I sit there and go, I've taught them something they didn't know yesterday, which then means when they go forward, they're going to be much further on the journey than they were initially, which then means they're going to be able to more comfortably have those conversations and learn more. And then they'll come back, might bump into me in a year's time and go, actually, I know all of this stuff now. And it's an amazing place to be in, and an amazing power to sort of hold for someone and to sort of unlock for someone and be like, no, we can have the conversation, because it might have even been they've never had the opportunity to ask anyone. So that's why they're asking all the weird and wonderful questions that are in your head, because we've all done it. We all sit there and meet someone that's completely different to what we see and go, hang on a second, I've got about 1 million questions and I don't know which one to ask first.
Yeah. And I don't know which one's appropriate.
Yeah. 100%. And also, like you say, with the race thing, people are going to get things wrong. You've got to allow people to get things wrong so they learn. Like, it's like a kid. When they first do a maths equation, they're going to get it wrong. They're going to get it wrong. They're going to say the wrong thing, or like it's like the thing I always say about disability. If you really want an honest conversation about disability, ask a kid. They don't pull any punches.
Yeah. No, they don't.
I wanted to pull on a thread that you mentioned earlier about we're going to change conversation a little bit, but you mentioned earlier that you worked in tech previously and then you've moved now into the career that you have today. Can you talk to us a bit about what that journey's been like and sort of how you made that decision to completely career switch?
Yeah. I spent 16 years working in tech. Got a computer science degree at the age of 21 years old, and worked as a software tester for pretty much 16 years. I guess I never really enjoyed it that much. About 4 years in, I was ready to experiment with things. I was like, okay, can I become an internet marketer? Can I get into property? And I was doing all these different side projects all the time. And then I kind of went on a bit of a life-changing trip. It sounds very cliche. I traveled around the world for a couple of years. I quit my job in 2015 and I went traveling with my then girlfriend. We broke up midway through. And I guess that journey included a lot of kind of not unintentional self-discovery. And was it discovery or just self excavation? I found myself in Peru and I'd been thinking about I did some plant medicine there. And I just saw that there was a lot of ways that I was being in my life that were really holding me back from the things that I really wanted or the things that were important. And I kind of came back from that trip. I stayed in tech for a few years, for probably another 3 or 4 years. But during that whole period, I was building my podcast up. I'd already been a dating coach for probably a couple of years in my early 20s. I did that a little bit. So I'd always kept an interest in dating and sex in particular. I studied Tantra for a couple of years. I got qualification in Tantra, being a Tantric practitioner. And a friend of mine, how it kind of happened is a good friend of mine, we're still very good friends. We started the podcast together and he came to me and said, look, let's bring all the knowledge we have of dating, the mechanics of dating and mechanics of sex, and put that together with what we know about self-development and self-growth and create a podcast. And I said, oh, that's a great idea. I'm down with that. And it kind of started from there, because what I was seeing was a lot of the advice from men was, and it still kind of happens a lot, is do this, don't say this, never do that, wear this thing. When you're with a woman, treat her badly, be really avoidant, don't show your emotions, and all these things which miss the nuances of relating and connecting. And then I guess in COVID times was in a way was a blessing for me, because I was working from home. So I was able to build my business a bit more, focus on getting a coaching qualification and learning more about the mechanics of coaching. And then I completely moved over in 2021. And that was, God, man, it's like a spiritual experience running your own business, to be honest. Going from having a 9 to 5 for years and then going into running your own business, and you're constantly with the challenges of like, oh, have I made enough money this week? Am I going to make enough money next month? What's coming in? What's not coming in? Am I doing well? I'm putting myself out in the world. Do people like what I'm saying? Do people think I'm an idiot? Dealing with self-judgment, dealing with negative comments from outside of people. Like, there's a lot of like self-development work that goes into that I didn't really have to deal with when I was in a company working for someone else with a paycheck that comes every single month. So it's been beautiful. It's been difficult. It's been incredibly challenging. I've had some of the most, incredible career moments in that time. I put up there, I was featured in, I've been featured in Mr. Porter, GQ, and Cosmopolitan in like the last year. These are magazines that I would have been reading, nonetheless.
Yeah.
And it's been beautiful to do that in what I love. And also, it's the little things in this that I didn't get when I was in tech. When I was in tech, it was all about just making a company more money, really. Today I spoke to a man who came to me a number of months ago in immense pain because of a breakup, and never believed he'd been struggling to move forward from this breakup for over 9 months. We've been working together for 3 or 4 months now. And he said to me today, he was like, David, I barely really think about my ex anymore. I feel like I'm really moved on. And, I was a bit worried a couple of months ago. I was like, man, he's not moving forward very much. Said to my partner, and she was reminding me, she's like, people take their own time, but this works. And I impact people's lives. And it's really beautiful to know that I do that, to feel that and to see that. And it's much more rewarding than getting my 6-figure salary.
I mean, I hear it. I mean, I'm going to ask you this because it's very much, I'm on a similar path at the moment, work a 9 to 5 job and do all this stuff on the side as well. How did you marry up the self-talk of like, okay, I need to take this jump. This is the right jump for me. This is my right step forward, and the safety of a standard job, steady paycheck. What were some of the conversations you were having with yourself during that period?
Yeah, some of it was Some of it's very logical of like, okay, what do I have in the bank? Yeah. How much money have I got in the bank if things don't go that well? How easily can I go back to a job if I leave? And some of it is kind of intuition, instinctual. There's this feeling. I was like, I feel like I'm really onto something here, and I can only really grow this if I'm not working. If I've got my energy out of what I call the trudge of my 9 to 5 into what brings me joy and brings light into my life and my energy, right? Lifts me up instead of pulls me down. And I remember there was a point, I had a friend of mine, Kapil, we went for dinner, and he was saying, oh, when you think about quitting your job? And I was like, oh, I'm going to make sure I save this much money, so I have this, blah, blah, blah. And he just said to me, he often talks in these terms, he was just like, that doesn't turn you on. I was like, what? He's like, that doesn't turn you on, does it? I was like, no, not really. He's like, what turns you on? I was like, I'd love to just quit in, at the time, I think was June or July. He was like, then do it. He's like, trust yourself, back yourself. He's like, back yourself. He's like, what do you need to put in place that you would be making enough money, or what would you need to put in place to reduce your outgoings, right? As well, because that's the one we don't always think about at that point. And what you need to do to grow your business to replace your income completely. And I was like, okay, that's some really good questions. And, I took the plunge and I think literally the month that I stopped working, the next few months I signed enough clients that I was fine for income for, the next 6 months. I didn't have to think and worry about that. I could focus on creating content. I could focus on, growing my podcast. I could focus on, what else was I focused on? Talking to new clients, building new programs and all that kind of jazz. And, it's worked, and it continues to work for me. I think some of it is there's a courage element, isn't it? There's some courage, there's some logic, and there's some kind of just bit of self-belief and backing yourself in the long term to make it work. But there's some logical parts of like, reducing outgoings was a really, really simple thing. I just was like, oh, I don't need to buy all this stuff. I don't need to eat out as often. I can remove all these subscription services that I barely use. And, save a bit better and cook more food or whatever it may be. But it's been, God, I don't have any regrets about the decision. Sometimes I look back, right, and I talk to friends who are in lovely, cushy 9 to 5 jobs, or I speak to some people who continued on the path and they're like directors of QA or directors of development and stuff like that. And I think, oh man, where would I be? How much would I be earning? Blah, blah, blah. And then I speak to them and I hear how miserable they are and how much they hate what they do. And they also want to know about what I do. And I'm like, yeah, man, I just changed this man's life in the last 6 months, and I'm not to be full of myself because they do the work. I'm just there guiding them. But I get that's almost payment for me, Like I said, I got a message from a guy yesterday who replied to a story on Instagram, and he said to me, he was like, David, the work that we did 2 years ago, right, completely changed my mindset around work and around relationships. And now I'm in a beautiful relationship with a woman, and that would have never been possible without the work we did together. And I get emotional when I read that, because that's why I do this.
It's amazing to hear, and it's that those moments where you go, okay, I'm doing something good. I just wanted to again pull on a thread that you mentioned. Obviously, we've spoken a lot about career, and I wondered what your opinions were on how men can better balance career ambitions when it comes to maintaining healthy relationships. Because I think me and even you can talk to the fact of like when you work a 9 to 5 job and you're building stuff from the side, it can be very tricky to then also maintain a good relationship. Now, I'm very lucky that Gina is very, very involved in everything that we do. So she very much understands everything and understands what I'm trying to do and is helping with that. But then that also means that we're both very aware of making sure we have us time and making sure that it's not all encompassing. Everything revolves around work, because otherwise you're not living. But how have you helped clients battling with that whole wanting to be? I think there's also this image of like, oh, but I want to be an alpha male and earn all this money and be at the top of the company and have this and have that. And that's going to be impressive to my partner, whoever that is, when actually that's not what they really want. So what have you seen with clients?
Yeah, Charlie, again, you've hit the nail on the head. Most women don't really care about your job. Really, like if you listen to this podcast, the women that you are wanting to date or you should be dating, the mature women, they don't really care about how much money you earn. They don't really care about your car, and they don't really care about your job title. What they really want, and what's really important in this kind of balancing work and relationship, because, a lot of my clients are like business owners or and C-suite people and so forth. And their jobs are really, really intense, or they're building businesses on the side and so forth. And it's all about structure, right? When we're at work, we provide ourselves with structure. We will have meetings, we have diaries, we have PAs, we have agreements with people and blah, blah, blah. But inside our relationship, we don't do those things, right? And this is vital, right? It's vital that you have agreements, but also you give vision, right? When you're thinking about your career, or your business you want to grow, you've got a vision for it. You're like, man, where I want to get to in 5 years is this, and what I want to be doing is this, and how I want to be of service is like this, and so forth. You have a vision. Give your partner, create a vision with your partner about the relationship and where it's going. Because in the times where you're really busy with working and so forth, that vision, as long as you are actively engaging in creating it, right, is the thing that you both can be like, our relationship isn't going to be like it is right now forever, right? That's one thing. Relationship vision is super important. And really living into that vision. And when I say that, is like acting in alignment with the vision, as in like taking action to create the vision. So say, for instance, I know me and my partner also, we've been together for about 5 years now. And one of the things that came in our vision after we've been together for 6 months or so, was living abroad. And I remember we were like, living abroad, wow, like we're in the middle of COVID, like how are we going to live abroad? And then it slowly just started to unfold and take little actions. I was like, well, when I quit my job, I don't need to be in the UK. Okay. And she was already freelance. She's a coach already. So then we started looking. I said, oh, look, here's a few locations we could live. Why don't we live somewhere warm? And we just started taking little actions. I took some actions, she took some actions, and eventually we found ourselves living in Madeira, in Portugal, a little island off the coast of North Africa, right? And there's always, even though I was working 10 hours a day, really at that point, every week I would still create some time for us. Just like you said, you're involving your partner in things, right? I'm involving her in what I'm up to, what I'm doing. Yeah. Talking to her about what I'm doing afterwards. So maybe for a man and listening to this and you're like, I'm building my business or I'm pushing my career. When you come home and you just sit on the sofa and you just veg out on Netflix or video games, take 5-10 minutes and just talk to your partner about her day and your day. So she's in your life. She's involved in your life, right? So that she feels that she is part of your life, not just this side piece that you kind of keep on the side. And then there's also creating structure in the relationship. So creating structure in relationship is like, okay, creating and leading your relationship, which is creating date nights, creating activities to do, creating ways to deepen your intimacy as well, right? And it might sound like, oh man, these things take loads of energy and loads of time. They don't. They only take that. They only makes you feel that way because they're new and they're different from how you've done relationships before. But when we start entering into relationships in this way, with the structure, with the leadership, with the conscious creating, right? Our partners, and I've seen this in so many guys, the partners are so much happier even when they see less of their man. Because they're like, we are a team. We're creating this life. It's not just, I don't know where this is going. He's just working a lot and we barely talk. We barely have intimacy and we don't talk about those things. And I don't know where this is going. That creates anxiety. Anxiety creates arguments. Arguments cause disconnection. Disconnection leads to breakdown of relationships. So like creating that structure and providing that structure of vision and, everyday tiny actions, as well as, they don't have to be big actions. That's the one thing, man. You don't have to do these big, grand actions of love. You can do very small actions daily, and weekly, that can be very cost effective or cost absolutely nothing.
Yeah. 100% is like some I've always believed of just checking in. There's something to be said for just checking in and making sure everyone's all right. But one thing you briefly touched on there. One thing I did want to ask you, because it came up in, I think it was Stephen Bartlett mentioned it, that he's doing it with his partner in terms of scheduling time with his partner. So almost using their diaries and going, right, on Tuesday evenings, that's me and Gina time, and that's us time. And the concept of it being changing your perspective on it in terms of some partners might see that as, oh, I've got to be put in your diary. And it's like, no, I kind of got where he was coming from. He said, but then, no, I'm booking you in because I show value and I want to spend that time with you and I want to protect that time rather than work responsibilities bleeding into that. Do you think there's some power in scheduling in time with your partner to really connect?
Yes, I actually think people should schedule sex.
Oh, that's controversial.
Yeah, if you struggle to make time for intimacy, schedule sex. Or schedule intimacy. It doesn't have to be sex or penetrative sex. Schedule time for intimacy. Put a 2-hour block on a Saturday night, and in exactly the same way you said, you protect that time. Because look at all the important things we put into our diaries. We put our gym, we put the meeting with our boss, all these important things we put into our diary, but we don't put our partners in there. We don't put our relationship in there. Right? We just think that the relationship's going to kind of like fit in between in the spaces. And as you said there, Charlie, work bleeds into things all the time. So if you don't protect it, right, it gets taken up by other things. And intimacy is one of those things that time and again, you know, men that come to me, the number of times I've spoken to men, they're like, me and my partner haven't had any intimacy, any sexual intimacy in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years. And it's just because we're so busy with work and we don't schedule it in. And now we feel a bit awkward and uncomfortable. I don't know what to do. Can you help me? It's a very common conversation I'm having. And all you have to do is schedule in a block. It could be once a month, once every 2 months, and you don't have to have sex. You could just, as one of my clients does, they call it naked time. So they go upstairs into the bedroom and they get into the bed naked, and then they see how they feel. Sometimes they've just lay there and talked. Sometimes they've had sex. Sometimes they've given each other massages, and they just allow what feels to come through them in that moment. But they commit to that 2-hour block for the practice of intimacy, because intimacy is a practice, right? Sex and intimacy is a practice. It's something that we have to work at, to deepen and be better at, you know, like loving is a practice. So I'm a big fan of scheduling sex, especially if you're in a relationship and that's an area that's dwindling. It's an area that you're not happy with. We can lead sexual intimacy through actions and conversations and doing some work, because sex is a very emotional thing. So we have a lot of stories and negative beliefs about ourselves and around sex because it's so taboo and we don't really bring out what I like to talk about. And it's very easy for our sex life to dwindle. So it's like scheduling in the things that are truly important to you. Like really, what's really important to you, your partner. If you set a priority of the things that are important to your life, most people will put their relationship pretty high, one of the top 2-3 things, right? Or if they've got kids, you put your kids. It's like, how often do you schedule time with those things? Or do you just assume that those things will fit in around everything else that's not as important as that?
How would you advise clients who are concerned about it in terms of the way it comes across to their partner? Or obviously opening, say, the conversation of scheduling sex to some partners, that's like, oh, I'm just, again, it's that whole discussion of, oh, I'm just another one of your meetings, and it's like, no, these are two very different things. But how do you advise clients on how to bridge that conversation with their partners? Obviously, we briefly touched on it. It's about protecting time, but how do you sort of advise them in terms of managing? Again, it's that using emotional intelligence to sort of understand how they feel and controlling it, so they understand where you're coming from, and that it's from a place of love rather than, oh, I'm just too busy.
Mm-hmm. It's easy to, coming from a place of love instead of obligation. I guess it's a case of, using, as you said, the emotional intelligence of what does my partner really desire, right? Intimately, right? What do they really desire? Most of the time in a relationship, when two people aren't having sex, I often see there's a lack of, was it not so much safety, but it's like a lack of stability. So they when the time comes to have sex, everyone's mind's elsewhere, right? So they're not relaxed. They're not present, right? They're thinking about work. They're like, oh, I'm too stressed. I don't want to, not tonight. I'm too tired. And then now if this is in the diary, right? you got time to prepare yourself. And I'm not talking about if you need to do, you know, body grooming and so forth. You have time to prepare yourself mentally. So it's like, if you rock up to this 2 hours, 3 hours we've booked in too tired, well, you knew what we were doing. You don't rock up to your meeting with your boss about your pay rise too tired. You make sure you cultivate the energy you need for the meeting because it's important to you. So first of all, one of the things I think is really important is like, what's the beautiful benefit? What are you trying to create by scheduling this time? You know, that answer is usually very often, I want to feel closer and more connected to you, right? And I want to feel, you know, I want to experiment with our intimacy. I want to feel the, you know, I want to have fun and time that's like uninterrupted, that's just for us, right? How many partners are going to go, oh, I don't want that. I don't want that. You know, that's why we're together. You know? And also important is addressing anyone's concerns, right? So it's to say, look, we're protecting this time for intimacy, but we don't have to have sex. There's nothing we have to do. Like, it's just that we have this time where we put all our distractions to one side. We put our phone, maybe we put our phones in the other room, we turn off the TV, and it's just time for us to connect, right? And then we can see how we feel in the moment, what we want to do, if we just want to sit and talk. But it's like to really have that for us to cultivate our relationship, to deepen our relationship. And, you know, to the men listening to this, like, you know, you say this to your woman, and there's no way there's almost zero chance of her saying she doesn't want it. She may be like a bit hesitant about it being a meeting and blah, blah, blah. But you bring that level of feeling and desire, right? And leadership to connection. It's what she wants, you know? And I know obviously not all women are the same, but like, as I work with men, I'm telling you, every time I talk to a guy, he's like, I want to have more sex. When I have enough sex, okay, you're going to schedule sex. Oh, she's uncomfortable with it. Why do you want to do it? What's in it for the two of you? And then he explains. The partner opens up to it, and then they do it a couple of times, and then they're both like, "My God, why have we not been doing this for the last 10 years?"
Yeah, I think as well. There's always, and I wonder whether there's an element of as well. You can make it more special because you've got that time booked in. If you want to make it more special, try something new, do something different. You know when it's going to happen. So you know when, okay, if we want to try this thing, then we've got one booked in on Tuesday. We can try it then, and that might be really cool, and it might be something different. Because a lot of relationships as well, they just want something new, something refreshing. So that is again, it creates that opportunity, I would imagine. On the topic of like relationships and intimacy, though, what's your opinion on, there's a lot of conversations around open relationships and polyamorous relationships and things like that when it comes to the modern relationships. Have you seen an increase in discussions with that with clients? What's your views on it? I personally, I'm not sure, but that's purely because it's not my sort of thing. And, but yeah, what have you seen?
Yeah, I've had clients across the spectrum, you know, like I've had, I'd also add in one relationship structure that we don't always think about, which is celibacy, right? Celibacy is another relationship structure with self, you know, there's only sex with self. And I have come across a lot more people practicing celibacy and polyamory, which are kind of what we might say the extremes of relationship, right? I would say that polyamory, I open related for a number of years. You know, that's how me and my partner also, we started our relationship. It was an open relationship. And it taught me a huge amount about communication, especially when you do it very consciously and very deliberately and with intention, because you have to communicate very difficult things, right? And be very aware and patient and present. You know, there's, you know, it is amazing the development that came from me having to tell my partner, hey, last night I slept with somebody else. You know, it was like this and blah, blah, blah. And then having to be like, is there any questions you want to ask me? And just sitting there, honestly answering whatever comes up without hiding, without lying. while my nervous system is going absolutely haywire, telling me it's not safe, that I shouldn't be there, I need to run away, that I need to shut down. She's crying. I'm having to be with the crying and be compassionate and being empathetic and trying to understand more about how she's feeling. That did amazing things for our communication because we really held and stayed in it. So I think there's some benefits. The problem I see a lot of the time for men is that they conflate polyamory, which is about loving many people, love, the very important part, right? The amory part, the loving of many people, yeah, with just sleeping with lots of people. And they're not quite the same thing. And what they want to do really is they want to sleep with lots of people and they don't want to have any difficult conversations and they don't want to have to do any of the emotional work or the communication stuff that come with it. They just want to really sleep with lots of people, which is fine. There's nothing inherently bad about that, right? There's nothing inherently wrong about that. I did that for many years and I enjoyed it a lot, and then I didn't enjoy it so much. But there's a lot more conversation I see now about different relationship styles and structures, which I think is very positive because I don't think monogamy is for everybody at all. I think there's a lot of toxic monogamy that happens, which is, where everyone just thinks they have to be monogamous. And then there's a kind of ownership of their partner and their partner's sexual expression or even their platonic friendships as well. So I think that is really positive for having more conversations, and there's more people publicly coming out talking about their polyamorous lifestyles or their choices to be a single poly person, which is someone who's like, I'm going to live alone and I don't want to do any nesting, but I'm going to have many partners, because it helps us shed some of the, ultimately very religious dogma around sexuality and around how relationships should look. But I think the thing to remember is that there's a lot of really valuable self-development work that is necessary to really step into polyamory in a very powerful and ethical way. And it's not necessarily easy, but it's very worthwhile. Some of my clients are in open marriages or polyamorous. I've got friends as well. And it's a wonderful way to grow, but you have to also be willing to be very humble and do the emotional work in there. But I think on the whole, I think it's really positive, but we should also be mindful of not using, polyamory or open relating as a way to avoid our dysfunctions or avoid our wounds. So if we have a fear around commitment, for instance, which I did definitely, I'm going to be polyamorous in open relationships, then is there part of me that's never really committing, right? Then yep. That's just a way to use this structure as a way to avoid things, right? And the avoidance stops me from growing, whereas I learned to really commit. It's like, oh my God, there's so much depth in committing, whether it's to one person or a relationship or a job or a career. Yeah. There's depth because you lose the other options and you're really putting your energy into one thing, and you have to face that fear of making the wrong decision and choice and so forth there that's kept you in the surface level in so many areas. So I think it's just looking at why you really want something. Is it really a deeper truth for you? Just a way to avoid some wounds and some pain or, having to face parts of yourself. But I think on the whole, most conversations about opening up how we think about sex and how we think about traditional relationship structures is positive because we all get to design our relationship more and more how we would like it to be. Like I've done a lot of work in our relationship to choose agreements and design our relationship in a way that works for both of us, not just in the way that we've been told monogamy should look like.
It's so true. And I think as well, it's that whole thing of allowing people to be different, because it's almost, I always feel like our society, we're obsessed with labels. We're obsessed. Oh, you got to be this or you got to be that. You can't be sort of in between. You can't have a foot in both camps. And I'm like, why can't you? There's no rule book. If it works for you guys, like as long as it works for everyone involved, but especially when we talk about relationships, then have at it. Like it makes no difference. I think there's certainly a place for, because I'm a believer of there's certainly place for labels because it allows people to then learn. Because one of my friends actually put it in perfect context for me. He had a car accident at the age of 16, became a wheelchair user. And then he was like, I want to research about disability and dating, but what do I search? And then he found the term interabled relationship. And there's a big discussion about it in the disability space about why should it be any different. But then the terminology meant that he could find it, which then meant he could learn about it and then find out that there was others like him. And then he felt a lot more comfortable about the situation. So I think there's a place for both labels and no labels, but there isn't. We don't have to be one camp or the other. You can, as you say, design what works for you. If it works for everyone involved, happy days, go for it. Like it doesn't. If it doesn't, if it doesn't concern you and it doesn't negatively impact you on a grand scale, just let people crack on. I don't. Yeah, it's a weird one. And just as a sort of last question before I go to the question that we ask every guest, it's a bit of a weird one, but it's something that's been brought up quite a lot, is the place of pornography when it comes to relationships and the impact that has had on men. I've had another friend of mine who's a disability sex toy specialist. We've had a discussion about it, about how like we're seeing a lot of pornography now be quite aggressive, and how that's impacting relationships for men and women.
Yeah. Pornography, I look at pornography in a way, it's like a multi-dimensional thing, like everything, right? It's got many dimensions. Like there's aspects of pornography where I look back and I've used pornography as an education tool in a very specific space, in terms of, say, certain fetishes. You start to learn like, oh, this is a fetish. People are really into leather, or people are really into feet, or, and like learning that these things exist. Or, for a while I was watching a lot of kind of tantric massage, porn to learn about tantric massage before I went and studied tantric massage. The thing is that inside of a relationship, again, it's agreements. It's agreements. We form agreements. For some people, when we think of porn, we only think of the negative stuff. Like, and there is some really horrible porn. There's porn's super aggressive now. Like in comparison to, I'm 40 years old, and when I started watching porn on my phone, which is, would have been 15 to 17 years ago, like there wasn't that much on offer, but porn seems to have become more and more extreme because, ultimately it's a bit like videos, right? They're videos and they're trying to get people's attention. The problem is that our brains aren't very good at telling the difference between real and fake. And when it comes to porn, we don't watch it and go, oh, look at this entertainment. Let me get some popcorn and watch this, right? And laugh at how stupid this is. We watch it from a young age, and then we try and act these things out. It's like movies. Like, I know when I was a kid and we went to watch Fast and Furious, when we got in our cars and drove off, like we could have killed people that night. Like it was chaotic, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely crazy. Right. So the same thing happens with porn. And this is the danger, because a lot of what we're seeing in porn is some really serious acts. Like, you've got choking, for instance, right? Choking can do serious damage to someone's windpipes and someone's health and asphyxiation, all these things. So people are watching porn and going, oh, that seems sexy. I'm going to do that to this woman I met, I'm going to meet next week. They do it without consent. They don't know how to do it properly. They don't know how to choke properly and so forth, which there are courses to learn to do these things properly, right? Or as safely as possible, right? Because they're not completely safe. And people get really hurt, and people get hurt not just physically, people get hurt mentally. People are traumatized by experiences, right? Or we watch this porn where it's very aggressive, where everything's very forceful, right? And then men find themselves in situations with women where they might have misread some of the cues they get from a woman, of interest or desire. And I talked about story earlier, but it's like they escape into this story of like, oh, I'm with this woman, and oh, she's my cleaner, and she's giving me that look. And we're thinking about the porno we watched last week, or we've been watching for the last 3 years. And then we start to reenact it out without really having the attunement to check in with her to see if it's actually what she wants, right? And what's really happening. And this is where we get into sexual assault and sexual assault allegations, because there's a lack of presence to what's actually happening in the moment, because they're more connected to the story in our minds. So I know it can be a real problem for couples. I've worked with plenty of men. I've worked with men who have porn addiction, and I've worked for a lot of men who are in relationship with women, and their partner's very uncomfortable with them watching porn. The big problem I see is where we watch porn, we feel shame around it. We don't tell anyone. We don't tell our partners. We lie about it. And then when they find out, they feel like they've been cheated. We've been lying to them. We've been hiding from them. And then we feel more shame, right? Because we've been found out. And it creates huge ruptures, because it makes us hide and lie, right, in our relationship, right? Whereas if we could be more open and go, yeah, I watch porn sometimes. and share it with our partner. Be like, oh, what do you like to watch? And be honest about what you watch, right? I think this can be a problem for some couples, because if you are into very extreme types of porn, that can be a problem. But there's ways in which we can use porn responsibly, ethically, in a way that can actually enhance our relationship, where we watch it together and we learn about each other's likes and dislikes, or some fantasies that each other have. And we can try out those fantasies, or be like, I like watching this porn, but I never want to try it out. And sometimes you can even just watch it together and laugh. But the key is bringing a level of awareness and consciousness to what we're watching, and thinking about, how is this impacting how I see women, right? For men, how does watching porn impact how I view women and how I objectify women? Do I start to look at women as just body parts? Because that's something I see with a lot of men. How does this impact the sex I'm having, right? Do I think I have to go for a jackhammer for an hour? How does it affect your self-esteem, your sexual confidence? Because, porn ultimately is entertainment, and they have artistic license over things. Now they have AI, so they can make things bigger, make things smaller, all sorts of, make things different colors. So it's like, how is it impacting your brain chemistry, the way you relate? And then make sure you're really aware of that and really conscious, and then make different porn choices. Or if it's something you're trying to stop doing, you feel that you've got addiction, or you're using it more than you want, is coming back from masturbating and watching porn all the time, and masturbating without porn, with just feeling the sensations on your body. I run a workshop sometimes called Mindful Masturbation. And I've seen a number of men where they pick up this practice and do for a little while. They start realizing that all their life, they've externalized desire. So when they look at porn, they feel aroused, and they don't know how to feel aroused from the sensations of their own body. So it's switching some of the mechanisms, to kind of move away from porn being our kind of central way to become aroused.
Yeah, as I completely agree, and I actually really like the idea, or like I say, do it if you watch it together, then you kind of learn about each other, and it kind of diffuses any of that difficulties in the bedroom of as you say, misreading signals and things like that. And I think there is such, I think also there's a huge thing as well that we've discussed before on the pod, of like it being used a lot in like it being the only source of education for a lot of young people around sex. And that's a wider discussion for, in terms of like how we can better educate young people surrounding sex, because the sex education that's out there now isn't really worth the paper it's written on when it comes to the national curriculum at the moment. I think they're even getting rid of it from memory. And I think that's the other conundrum we have with porn, is that it's where a lot of particularly boys get their education for sex, because I think even going back to when I learned, we literally got taught how to put a condom on, and then we also got taught about the menstrual cycle. That was pretty much the strength of it. And then we got taught maybe the bio of like how a baby happens, and that was it. That was it. There was no further discussion, because it's still treated as this taboo subject. And I think that's the other issue we have with porn, is like, it's one of the only sources, well, one of the more readily available, well-known sources of quote unquote education, because people don't know what's out there in terms of, there's specialists like yourself, there's specialists like others that can actually educate people on it. And that's the other thing when it comes to porn for me. It's that whole thing of so many people are reliant on it to teach them about intimacy, and it then bleeds into relationships. And I think that's also that feeds into this whole discussion around men, relationships, sex. It all links together. But yeah, that's sort of my 2 cents, I suppose. Although I'm no specialist. The only thing I would add is I think there needs to be a disability element to sex ed as well, because yeah, that was trial by fire when I started dating. But yeah, I think there's so much we can do to better educate people on relationships and dating and sex in particular. But last but not least, I ask every guest this question, which is, what's one piece of politically correctness that you really strongly agree with or disagree with?
God, there's a lot. There's a lot I agree with, and there's a lot I disagree with. Trying to think of one that really Well, you know what? This is one I have really a bit of a bugbear for me. It always has been. As you probably notice, if you can see the camera, people, I'm black, and I mentioned that earlier too. I used to see this thing in particularly white co-workers, where if they were describing someone in the office, they would avoid using the color of their skin as one of the things to describe them. So, people would describe me as tall, with dark hair and dark eyes. And it's like, no, he's black. It's okay. We can say someone's black. We can say someone has South Asian descent, or, we can say what people look like, so that we make easy descriptions of them. And I understand that people are worried that, oh my God, I'm being racist, but it's not. If you call me black, it's not being racist. Or, people call me African American. I usually correct them because I'm not African or American. But it's this avoidance of kind of describing people as we actually see them. And not from a derogatory point of view, but like as a simple, like, okay, if someone needs to find me on a floor full of another 200 people and I'm the only black person there, saying I'm black might be the most useful bit of information.
Yep. 100%. I completely agree. I see it all the time. The hesitation of he's ginger. And then it's like, yeah, you could say the other thing as well. I'm also in a wheelchair because that does make me stick out like a sore thumb. It's honestly, like, as you say, it's just describe people as they are, because I think as well, there's a difference between being offensive and just stating a fact. Like, yes, I do use a wheelchair. Yes, I am often in a wheelchair. If you want to use that as a descriptive term, go ahead. Like, I see it all the time. As I say, it comes back to that awkward conversations of like, you always get the, can I, yeah, you're, yes, I'm in a wheelchair, Karen. Yes, it's fine. Absolutely fine. You can say it. It's not a bad word. It's so true. So true. And this is what I'm concerned. This is what I always say is this is why I'm concerned about where we're going, because no one can say anything. Don't get me wrong. There's, like you say, there's definitely a line that you don't cross, but people say the wrong shit all the time. It doesn't have to be offensive. You sit there and you go, what you've just said is incredibly unhinged, but I can see where you're coming from.
Yeah. I think people are so scared to make mistakes that they live in silence around a lot of things, They may not make a mistake. And then we have a bad habit of, if someone makes a mistake, we jump down their throat instead of actually sit with them and educate them and be patient and understanding. We have this idea that people should know. People shouldn't know shit, right? People don't know what they don't know, right? The other day, I was with someone and they described a black person's colored. And I just said, look, it's not really a term we use anymore. And they were like, oh, I hope I didn't offend you. You didn't offend me at all. I was like, I can tell you why we don't use the term colored anymore, but like, we just don't use it anymore. And he was like, why is it? I was like, well, it's really deeply associated to South African apartheid. So we just don't use it. We can be more specific with people. And they were like, oh yeah, shit, I never thought about that. I said, yeah. And they were like, oh, great, thanks for that, David.
Yeah, it happens all the time. You said that it's just someone has that epiphany. Like, I've had those conversations with my friends where they're from different backgrounds, like I've got friends that are asexual, and there were certain conversations I had with that friend, and I was like, never even thought of that in my life. Thank you for that. And to be fair, till I met this person, I didn't even know asexuality existed. So when we met, there was hang on, what? What does that mean? And it's so true. Education is key. Education and communication. I think that's literally the key to most situations, really. And empathy. I think empathy is a huge one. But David, thank you so much for coming on. It has been absolutely amazing having you on. I've learned so much. I've really enjoyed this episode. We've clearly got a lot of things that we align on, which was really nice to experience. But again, thank you so much for coming on. I will link all of David's details below. So if you want to check out any of his stuff, get in contact with him, check out the description below. I will put everything for you there. But yeah, thank you so much, David.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Not Quite Podcast. Please make sure you follow us on TikTok and Instagram to get regular updates about the podcast.